At least in my eyes, you know, what Lieberman was for Orthodox Jewry in politics, so to speak. In my eyes, you have been for Jewish public service, because when I grew up, an Orthodox Jew having a position of influence and an executive position in a major Jewish organization was absolutely unheard of.
And it is still very rare today. There was a period when there were more, but it's again, I think, fewer. Although there are more Orthodox Jews, I think generally in the service of the community, it is still a sensitive thing. When I became the executive of the Conference of Presidents, one of the leading people said to me, "Now isn't it time to take off your yarmulke?" Mm-hmm. And I said to him, "Now is the time for me to get a bigger yarmulke."
That's right.
And I was once interviewed for a job that I didn't want as the head of one of the big 3 or 4 organizations. And the chairman of the committee said, "Look, out of respect for me, you should come." So I went in, and just before I went in, I took off my yarmulke, and I put it in my pocket, and I went in, and I did an hour-and-a-half interview. And I saw that these guys were really turned on. Mm-hmm. So the chairman said to me, "Is there anything you want to say now?" I said, "Yes," and I put my yarmulke back on. I said, "You interviewed me now, but I'm the same person whether I wear yarmulke or I don't. I wear yarmulke because I want to. It's a matter of identification. It's not halachically required. I'm a Yeki, so it's even less required."
That's right.
But you know, Shimshon Raphael Hirsch in his English studies, they didn't wear
They didn't wear,
yarmulkes
no,
either.
in the Real Shul, they didn't.
And I said, "I'm the same person. The other problem is you have this with my age. You know what? I can't get older for you." It's the same thing with both. And they invited me back for the second and the third round, though I told them all the time I wasn't interested in the job. But it was important to establish the principle. And today, things have changed. Most events are kosher, though not all yet. And Shmira Shabbos is much more widespread than it was then. I had one chairman of the conference who, when he came into office, it was right before Shavuot, and he said to me, what time does your holiday begin?" By the time he left, he never missed a Friday where he didn't call me and say Shabbat Shalom. And I think that there is a transformation that has taken place, greater recognition. And the truth is that the Orthodox community has great talent, is producing the best young leaders, and if they're smart, they'll take advantage of it.
Well, that would be very true. I think that, for instance, in the federations in America, if there was greater Orthodox presence in the executive and the official offices, the federations themselves would have a different viewpoint of us.
And if there were greater Orthodox participation in the boards and in the donors, and recognizing what federations do for the Orthodox communities as well, right. There's a mutual relationship. And when Orthodox Jews are participants, then they can have a greater say and help pave the way, both at the professional level, but you see it in communities like Baltimore and others where Rabbi Neuberger paved the way for involvement.
In Detroit with Gary Torgo.
Well, he was the secretary of the JCRC. He was involved in the federation. He didn't separate the yeshiva from the community, as is true in many other places. And because of that, you've had from presidents of the federation and in other cities as well. There is, it's a need on both sides. We both build barriers, and we both have to build bridges. And it's not by defensiveness, but by recognizing that we can strengthen each other. Orthodox Jews will make an increasing percentage of the general population. Isolating them will be contrary to everybody's interests. And the same, we have to look at our responsibilities to the broader community. Fact is that Orthodox Jews are involved across the board. They're in everything. If you look in AIPAC, if you look in bonds, if you look at the major institutions of Jewish life, Orthodox Jews today are participants.
But that's a great change of mindset, because I remember when I first became a lawyer, for which I have repented, in Chicago. So the Jewish Lawyer Society, the Decalogue Society, had an annual banquet. And the annual banquet, was not kosher. and there were a number of Orthodox lawyers, and we protested, and absolutely it was like talking to the wall. They looked at us that we were an anachronism and someone that was making unreasonable demands, etc. I think that mood has changed in the general community.
Generally, yes.
The general community that has changed. But nevertheless, in the Orthodox community, the sense of separatism, us and them, to a great extent still reigns. It still,
and maybe increases.
Yeah, maybe has increased is right, because
it comes out
as we have become more powerful, so then we think that somehow we don't, not only don't we need them, we don't want to be associated with them.
Well, I think it's both. I think it's out of increasing powerfulness, maybe. I'm not sure that that's really the right description, but it's also an increasing sense of insecurity. And I think it's a combination of both that drives this sense of defensiveness, and it is not new in Jewish history, in Jewish life. Part of the problem is that the emphasis, whether in the media or in our daily lives, is always on what differentiates us, what separates us.
Not what unites us.
And if you look at what unites us,
there's much more.
People always ask me, how do you keep 51 organizations together? I tell them I give them a common enemy, me, but that's only partially true, that if you can focus on what unites us, what we have in common, that we have one faith, and one faith, that what brings us together far outweighs our differences, all of a sudden you can begin to deal with the differences in a whole different atmosphere.
Absolutely.
The problem is that and there are people who exploit separation for their purposes, and it's not for the communal interest. The one thing HaKadosh Baruch Hu taught us throughout all of Jewish history is there was one precondition to every nace, to every miracle that happened to the Jewish people, and that was Achdus.
Right, the unity of the Jewish people.
When we stood at Har Sinai, Ki Ish Echad B'Lev Echad, as one people with one
By
heart,
Purim,
HaKadosh Baruch Hu said you could do it. Lech Kenosis Kol HaYudim, that Esther said. If you look at every miracle only had one precondition, and it wasn't the size of our tzitzis, and it wasn't how glatt the meat was. The one condition was Achdus. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, when you feel what's in each other's heart, now you're ready to get the Torah. When he saw what we did for Soviet Jews and Ethiopian Jews and Yemeni Jews and Iranian Jews and Iraqi Jews, things that nobody thought was possible. When we marched for Soviet Jewry, when I came to New York, people said to me, "You're crazy." The biggest Rosh Yeshiva in the world called me and said, "What are you doing? You're never going to free them. You know,
that's right. You're only going to make it worse." I remember that's what they told us.
And I will tell you in the confines of this room, I know it's not going anywhere except for the cameras, that Reb Moshe Feinstein, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, was convinced that you could never get worse than the situation in Russia, because he lived under Stalin.
That's right.
Wasn't even thought Hitler was worse. And we had several discussions about what I was doing, and he couldn't, in his view, see how it could be better. And I said, look, we don't do anything without consulting the people in Russia. I don't put their lives in danger. It's easy to throw a brick through a window if you don't pay the price for it. Mm-hmm. It feels good. You know, you might get a headline, but what happens to the people who have to pay the price? Right. And Reb Moshe would always, he was open-minded, but and when he saw the changes we were able to bring about at one Solidarity Day, I got a call early in the week, and it said that Reb Moshe is going to send a message with his son-in-law, Rabbi Tendler. Of course, we were all very excited. This was a great breakthrough, and we announced it, and of course he came under a lot of pressure, and he called me Erev Shabbos, and he said, look, I'm under such pressure. I said, Rosh Yeshiva, I don't want you to have it, forget it. We'll take care of it, we'll get out of it gracefully, don't worry. Motzai Shabbos, he called me, and he said, I couldn't sleep the whole Shabbos because of this. I have to do it. And he sent Rabbi Tendler with a message. There were 150,000 people. As all of you who attended, this shul was actually the first one I came to when we were mobilizing for Soviet Jewry, and many of the people, leaders of the movement, came from here. And you could hear a pin drop. And he called me that evening and he said, it would have been the greatest mistake of my life if I had succumbed. He said it was the biggest Kiddush Hashem that he has seen. And of course, the reverberations were immediate, and then you saw the forces.
So what happened? And really, Soviet Jewry, in my opinion, and I'm never wrong. Right. And
you told me that before to make sure.
I reinforce it. But Soviet Jewry brought down the Soviet Union.
100%. Soviet Jews made
It was
glasnost.
not the missiles, and it was not the Reagan and tear down the wall. All of that could only work because inside the Jews in Russia undermined the entire system.
100% right, even if you didn't tell me to say it. Soviet Jews made glasnost possible.
I told you it's unrehearsed.
Glasnost possible. They made perestroika possible.
Right.
A handful of people took on a prison that spanned 2 continents. And against all odds, no one believed.
No one thought.
I remember when the Lubavitcher Rebbe used to talk to us about it, and he had a right to have you because of all that he did inside and
Right.
continued, and he never stopped. The Mesiras Nefesh of his people was unbelievable. And his vision of it until we came to the Brownover case, and I paid the exit tax for Herman Brownover. I think it was $32,000. And when he came out, you could see that the Rebbe talked about it in somewhat different terms when he saw that we could balance the activities of let them live as Jews and let them leave as Jews.
Right.
But Soviet Jews, when they hijacked the plane, that was the license for us. Because when they put their lives on the line,
Right,
how could we
Mendelovich,
do
yes.
less? Exactly, and Kuznetsov and the others, Almanson. And we always consulted with them with what we did, because it's too easy to fall into a trap, and where the people there who left behind have to pay a price, and it was true in our activities for Iranian Jews and all of the other communities. You have a sense of achrayus. Sometimes you have to make decisions, but you have to think about the consequences, and not just the short-term consequence, but the longer term. It's not the headline you make, it's the result you achieve.
That's right. It's the
And it
strategy.
frustrates a lot of people, and I understand it, and people call me and say, march on Washington, march on Washington. But I have to think about what is the consequence, what's the message, when do you use it? It's something you can only do periodically when it really is necessary and will have the maximum impact. Other times we have to use other methods. Believe me, I would like to get up and scream every morning and say all the things and use language like we read in the certain magazines recently, but we have to think in a larger context. And Soviet Jews did a miraculous thing. They broke down the Iron Curtain. They turned it into a Venetian blind.
That's right.
And what Reagan did was very important. Jackson Vanik was an important instrument.
thing.
But they were instruments. These people put their lives on the line.
Absolutely. To get back to the point that was raised here, Yair Lapid, who is not necessarily beloved in the Orthodox community.
The numbers show that he's not so beloved in Israel.
No. Anybody that takes on to be the Minister of Treasury in Israel, the Minister of Finance,
And didn't study economics.
and didn't study economics, which probably helps.
In Israel, certainly.
In Israel, certainly. Is
have
immediately suspect.
Yeah.
But he made a speech last summer in which, to an Orthodox venue, semi-Haredi venue. And he said in the speech, listen, you won. Your ideology is held firm. Your influence is growing. You, to a great extent, are the future of the state of Israel. Now do something. Be part of, So I thought that was a marvelous clarion call.
And it's a recognition of a reality.
And it's a recognition of a reality. And yet, because we have been in the bunkers for 250 years, since the beginning of the Enlightenment and the Haskalah, so then Orthodoxy has always been defensive, and always, therefore, it breeds suspicion and separatism and everything else. And we've seen the terrible damage to Jews and Judaism that came out of all of these streams, so to speak. But now, now if we have the talent, and the Orthodoxy is affluent as it has never been affluent before in its history, and it has numbers and it has success, so his challenge is correct. So now do something. So let us build it, right? Instead of cursing the others, let us build it. And we have the opportunity to do so. The only thing, Israel is very complicated because it's politics, it's political parties, It's, it's a state. So a state has a budget, and the state has, my brother-in-law needs a job. It has all of these things to it. To a certain extent, American Jewry, I think it's easier to achieve a broader view of the matter than it is in Israel, simply because American Jewry is not a state. It's a
voluntary community.
It's a voluntary community.
Well, I think those things are, as again, you're right, but first of all, I think sometimes separatism, degrees of separatism are sometimes necessary.
Well, they'll always will
be.
But
when you build walls of protectionism and you don't look at them within the larger context, then they can be you turn against yourself. We see it now with some of the Islamists, lahavdil,
Right.
about, and I don't mean ISIS necessarily, but others, where the ideology can take such a heavy toll on the people. The realism that I think Lapid recognizes, that 51% of the children in first grade now are Arab or Haredi.
You're right.
So perhaps 25% of those are Haredi. This is the future of the country. It's the future of Israel.
Right.
And they recognize that if they don't tap into it, and the first target population amongst Arabs is Haredi women. You don't know, well, you do know, but the audience probably doesn't know how many thousands of Haredi women
are in colleges
are in special
today.
colleges and in training courses. And I can tell you, I was at a meeting with some of the leading high-tech venture capitalists in Israel, and one of them got up and he said, look, it's time to be honest with ourselves. We discriminate against them. It's our fault. When a Haredi guy walks in the room, you look at him with suspicion. You don't think of him. And he said, I will tell you that the most successful companies I have today are because of Haredi people who now man the computers and who are creative and who are reliable workers and who come every day and do what they have to do. And he said, it's our fault as well. And others got up and did mea culpas. They clapped al chait for what they themselves. And I meet many high-tech companies, and you see increasing numbers from guys leading the companies, playing key roles, being the major technical resources for these companies. That has to be more, and there has to be an approach which doesn't make it usser, that doesn't keep saying to the people, you're outside the community if you dare to get an education, if you serve a Nacha Haredi. Why should they be beaten up when they come home? They should be carried on their shoulders
Right.
and welched back into their communities.
Absolutely.
And say, you are the heroes, you are doing this, you're saving our lives, you're protecting us. And the achrayus of rabbanim and leaders is that if chas v'shalom an incident like those that take place, they should be out there hugging those Nachal Haredi soldiers, welcoming them and showing them that it's acceptable and welcome. One of the biggest rebbes in Israel, with whom I meet fairly regularly, I know what he really thinks. Now, many of them are afraid to speak out because they get under such pressure and they
That's
get
right.
beaten up. He's courageous. He does it. And he recognizes that if guys aren't going to learn, they should go to work, but they should go to the army also. And this is a growing trend in Israel. The economic necessity will breed it. You cannot continue to have cycles of poverty where generation after generation live in poverty. You're right, we're an affluent, maybe the most affluent from community ever, but we also have the greatest demands.
Right.
How many people in this community don't have enough to eat? You would be shocked. How many guys go off every day with a briefcase but no job? How many families literally on Shabbos don't have enough money for meals? The Shul I daven, my Rebbe says all the time, begging people for money because he has case after case of guys in their own shul who don't have enough to make ends meet. Even if they work, they're the underemployed poor. And we have so many demands. Tuition is a critical crisis for us.
So what about tuition? Let's. If a person, Baruch Hashem, has 4, 5, 6 children in school. So he needs $70,000 before he can.
Not if he goes to Israel, go on Aliyah, you get a much cheaper education.
Right.
But there is another thing. You said it before. There are many people in our community with huge wealth. If people gave tzedakah proportionate to their wealth,
It would be a
we
different
could
world.
cover.
That's right. There is
the
enough.
needs.
There's enough money to float it all.
I sat on the boards of 3 yeshivas, and I sat on the tuition committee of 2. And I know people who came in and requested, reduced tuition, but they didn't hesitate to go away for Pesach or go away on a summer vacation. It cost them tens of thousands of dollars, that more than would have covered the tuition. So there's a mindset that, the yeshivas come last. Then in halacha, the first thing you got to do is establish a school. It's the first responsibility of parents. It's the first responsibility of a community. It's locus parentis. We're responsible to see every child, not just our own, gets an education. So if we were able to really tap the huge reservoirs of wealth that exist, we could take care of yeshivas and go to the federations and go to other sources and find tuition tax credits so that everybody here who didn't vote and whose voice wasn't heard, you are to blame too. We have a title to it. It's not a violation of the Constitution. We find constitutionally acceptable ways to do it. They did it in other states. But it all depends on our involvement, our willingness to speak out. And don't worry so much whether you get a zoning change so you can build another 3 floors on your house, as much as that we demand that they give us the assistance that they're entitled to. Think if we had to send all the yeshiva kids to public schools, we'd crush the system in a day. They couldn't take care of it.
I have a friend, a distant friend.
I hope more than one.
Well, no.
Just
Rabbis have acquaintances, very few friends.
Yeah, we have interests. Yes, I know.
Interests. But I have a distant friend who happens to be a comptroller for a large casino gaming company that in the billions and billions of dollars. And he told me, he said, that there is enough Jewish money lost every day in Las Vegas to float the entire Jewish community of the United States. And so that's one way of looking at things.
So the Jews boycotting Atlantic City is what crushed it, right? I guess.
Well, it's just a statement of the fact that we have never yet been successful in truly ordering the priorities of the Jewish community as to itself, both individually and even institutionally. I mean, but there's a viewpoint as to where we should invest, how we should invest, and what we should demand, and it's not even spoken about. That's what bothers me. It's not spoken about in our synagogues and in our newspapers and our media. Instead, most of the things that are spoken about again are about the divisiveness more than about what could really save us.
Look, I think it's important that Orthodox Jews and Jews generally serve on the boards because we need them in the hospitals, so you need entree, you want to make sure it's kosher food, and sensitivity, and having people on the board is very important. The major change came because till World War II and even in its aftermath, Jews couldn't go on the board of the museums, they couldn't go on the boards of the regular hospitals, right. They were excluded. So they looked in turn, if they wanted to have a coven, you had to be the president of a Jewish thing. Today, that's no longer true. And so they're willing to give $10 million to be on the board of a museum of art, where they wouldn't give $1 million, $100,000 to be head of a Jewish entity. And there are exceptions, of course. There are people who give large amounts, but they will give much larger amounts to their alma mater, to the football team, to other things that are important to them. And the real question here is one of balance, that when they were excluded, one could understand that they looked to get in. When I came into the field, one of the big issues was about Jews, Jewish members in country clubs, discrimination against Jews in country clubs. Who today cares one iota about country clubs? Right. Nobody. About Christmas stands. Right. Those were the big issues. They were the rallying calls. That was the mandated issues that people devoted themselves to. And today, it is very different. I mean, we have to acknowledge the changes that have taken place. And it's not just in regard to that. When people tell me about young people, part of the problem is that we took away the issues. Russian Jewry was a great issue for bringing Jews back.
That's right.
I remember Rivka Alexandrovich came to our house in Flatbush, and she said to Freddie and I, all of our suffering is worth it if we save one of your children. Wow. They saved hundreds of thousands of our children, and I mean hundreds of thousands. People who came to me after Solidarity Day, the first day when we did it against all odds and much opposition, even from within the community, and 50,000 people showed up. And Rabbi, I acknowledged that this shul was one of the mainstays of the Soviet Jewry movement. That people came. An 85-year-old man brought me $5, and he said, "I want you to have this." He said, it was the first time I was born in America that I ever did anything Jewish, and I was so proud. Soviet Jews gave us a cause that was so pure, and the same thing with Ethiopian Jews and Syrian Jews, etc. But we succeeded. So our kids look and they don't have a cause. And Israel is so complicated today that they don't even know where they should come out often on the issues, and they're too ignorant. Soviet Jewry, you didn't have to know a lot. You knew Jews were discriminated. It's easy to get the message across.
You don't think it's easy to get well, I agree with you that for some reason Israel doesn't grab us, but it should.
It does for many, and I'm not saying, when we did the rally in Washington, in 1 week we mobilized 200,000 people. It was never done before in history in America. People come out, but Jews come out against. It was the massacre at the Park Hotel that brought people out. Yeah. It was, in each case, when they came out for Soviet Jewry or marched against Russia, Jews don't march for things so much.
They march against.
They march against. That's one. Two, we are a generation that is ignorant. How many people can really make the case for Israel today? Our kids, frum kids, who even go to day schools, who go to the yeshivas, they cannot answer.
Because they don't know the history and they don't know the story.
And we tested it. And unless they read your books, and there's very little else out there, there are no curricula. Our kids don't know. And if you don't believe me, go home. And I've tested this many, many times. Go home, talk to your kids or grandchildren. See if they know what happened in 1940. I give an annual speech here in the community. And one guy came to me and said, how could you say that? My kids go to Israel every year and they go to the yeshiva. And I said, just check. And I said, if I'm wrong, next year at the speech, I will publicly apologize to you. And I came to shul at Mincha, a little late as usual, and he was waiting. And he reminded me that I was late. And he said, I was waiting here for you because I wanted to tell you. At lunch today, I said to my 3 yeshiva bachrim, I started talking about Israel, and my 16-year-old turned to me and said, what are you talking about? We took it from the Palestinians in 48, didn't we? You think it's the exception? Our studies show it's the rule. Our kids don't know. And if they go to campus, they're not inoculated, they don't know, they can't answer, and they fall victim. Frum kids fall victims
to the propaganda.
To the same propaganda, to the leftist professors or extremist professors, to others, in the same way that the general population. I think it's better. I mean, they're more attuned to it, they're more sympathetic, they care more about Israel, I would say. The more the education, Jewish education they have, the more they're attuned to it. But it is not automatic. It is not something that we can take for granted. And we take our kids for granted. You know, when the Catholic Church says, give me a kid till he's 6, you can have him the rest of their lives. What do we have that we show 6-year-olds who see on television and news reports that Israel bombed, that Israel killed, that Israel did this, Israel did that? No parent with a 7-year-old, 8-year-old, 9-year-old, but they hear it. And I brought a group of psychologists together and I said, what do we do? How do we counter this? And after several hours of discussion, they came to me and they said, come back in 10 years and we'll show you. You'll see the result. Parents don't take the time to talk to their kids and don't educate them. And they feel embarrassed. They will not stand up and speak up for Israel. We have a disaster on the campuses. There isn't a day that I don't get a report of some anti-Israel, anti-Semitic, often violent incident on an American campus. Not talking about Europe. We're talking about in the United States. And it is growing every day. The assumptions that we had made about America are wrong. It's true the BDS didn't boycott, divestment, and sanction didn't catch on as it did in Europe to the same degree. But I'm telling you, watch this year. You will see major American corporations coming under increasing pressure
to divest.
And what SodaStream did by moving the factory, which they had every right to do, and it cost Palestinians, hundreds of them, jobs. The mayor of Jenin called me one night, late at night, and he said, you got to stop this boycott stuff. I said, you're telling me I have to stop it? I said, why are you saying it? He said, because I have 200 people working in SodaStream, and they make $2,000 a month. They come here, they'll make $200 a month. They'll turn to violence and terrorism, and I will pay the price. The BDS movement is growing, in Europe especially. You see how many countries will be Judenrein. I'm telling you, and I said it here 10 years ago at a Friday night speech, and European leaders especially got affronted and didn't like to hear it, just as I spoke since the 80s about the danger of Islamic fundamentalism and nobody wanted to hear it, and about a danger of Iran. It's not that we didn't know. We didn't want to know. That's the danger. We avoid the reality. It's not comfortable, I know, for people, and I know there's every reason. We have so many things in our mind and so many things that we want. 70 years ago, the world said they didn't know. It was a lie. They didn't want to know. We know from the revelations that are coming out now, that we're learning only now, about the Shoah, that there were 44,000 labor camps, slave camps, concentration camps in Europe. They didn't know that there was a place in Britain, a mansion, where they kept Nazi officers that they captured. And they had Jews sitting in a room taping them. Everything, the bathrooms, the trees, everything was bugged. They knew every detail. But they locked it away then. They didn't take it out at Nuremberg. And some guy, by chance, found them this year. And I can give you many more examples of the things that we're finding out. I just, this past month, published a work together with Beit Ashkenaz that we worked on for 10 years of the shuls destroyed on Kristallnacht. And we released it on November 9th, and I gave it to Bibi that day, Prime Minister Netanyahu, because they're, the history books say 295.
No, it's way more than that.
The history books till now had said 195, 225, 300. Yeah. Why? The Nazis put out the figures, and people bought it, and they called it Kristallnacht. Why was it Kristallnacht? We call it Pogromnacht. Right. It was a night when Jews got killed, and they put out the image of crystal and glass and all that, and everybody bought it. We used it till now. We identified in this book 1,411 shuls and stibuch that were destroyed that night, only in the areas under Nazi control. It doesn't include another 150 in East Germany and the ones in Austria. Just there, 1,411, and each one is described, and each community is described, because there is no record in English. And I said you got to know how they lived, not just how they died, and to tell the truth so that future generations will know the reality. So it wasn't that they didn't know. They didn't want to know. And Jews found it convenient to buy the lies. I wanted to know always, how did people get up the next day and have breakfast after Kristall? They saw it in the New York Times. They knew this thing took place. How did they get up the next day and go on with life? But you know what? I see it even now.
That's
how
right.
People get up. Do you think about Iran? Do you think about the danger? Look what ISIS, look at the measure of today's society, and the greatest recruitment tool is beheading people. That's ISIS recruits 1,000 people a month, 30,000 probably there already. And now in Yemen they behead people, the Houthis.
The Saudis are behead.
The Saudis do it for fun and sport.
Yeah.
But the Houthis are doing it in Yemen, took over Yemen, no reaction from the world.
No.
The second most strategic crossroads at the Bab el-Mandab Straits. Now the Iranians have that, and they have the Straits of Hormuz. They're doing it in Lebanon, they're doing it in Syria, they're doing it in Iraq, beheading people. Why then shouldn't this guy go into a shul with a butcher knife and just hack to death poor people?
Because he knows the headline will be that the Israeli police killed 2 Palestinians.
Well, they should look at the CNN headline.
That's
Six dead in attack, then
That's
finally 4 Israelis, 2 Palestinians killed in this thing.
Yeah.
At first they said it was a mosque.
Yeah.
And they get away with it? How many people here saw it, wrote letters, called CNN, and said, that's it, we're not going to tolerate it anymore?
That's right.
There should be such outrage over this stuff, because it means us. They don't mean those Karbonos. And I went to the Levaya yesterday of Rabbi Torsky, Zatzal, and you couldn't even get close to it. It was a mob scene. But where's the outrage? Where's our community? And the whole world has fallen into this trap. We didn't learn anything from 70 years ago. 10,000 Christians are massacred every year. Now, can you imagine if 10,000 Jews, chas v'shalom, were killed? 1,000 Jews every year massacred. We had the big tolls in Israel, but there was a reaction. People cared. The only one who speak out about the Christians are the Jews.
That's right. The Pope is quiet.
The whole world, they spend 50% of the time of the UN Human Rights Council condemning Israel, the one democracy. But Iran can carry out 1 execution every 8 hours, 7 days a week, 52 days a year. More than 850 last year alone. Political executions of gays, of priests, of anybody who doesn't abide by the rules. Where's the outcry? Where's the standard of the world? Syria, 200,000 dead. Who cares? We are working now on behalf of the Yazdis. You may have read about them. They're the ones that in Mosul and elsewhere. They have 5,000 women in a camp whom they use. I won't describe in a shul what they do with them. But they came to us and they appealed. Bomb the roads. And every one of the people from the president's conference in that room thought the same thing.
Auschwitz.
Bomb the railroads. The same plea, the same cry, because the world doesn't change. The only hope we have is that Jews have changed, that we learned the lessons. It's why we put the emphasis on history, why Yiddishkeit puts such a strong emphasis on history. And it's not about the past, it's about the future.
It's about current events.
But it's about the future, that we learn from the past. We don't get lost in the past like the fundamentalists do. We look at the past as a guide. Churchill once said, the further back you look, the further ahead you will see.
Yeah.
Our Chazal said it 1,000 years earlier.
That's right.
And they kept saying, you got to learn the lessons. And it's not that history repeats itself. History does repeat itself. The uniforms may be different. Colors of the uniforms can change, the language, the geography. But the fundamental threats from the outside and from the inside. And we learn it from this week's parsha, from Yaakov, when Yitzchak is challenged first by the Philistines when he digs the wells. Yeah. And what do? They stop up the wells, not just so the Jews won't get it.
So they won't have it either.
And all the future generations will deny water in the desert. It doesn't make any sense. And he called it he called it consternation, because he said, why would people do this to themselves, let alone do to us? And they didn't care until the water flowed. As long as it was working hard, while Jews built the land, then nobody cared. Nobody cared about Al-Aqsa until the Jews came into the scene. Then all of a sudden, the Muslims and others who turned their back on Yerushalayim all of a sudden discovered it. So Yitzchak Avinu, what does he do? He does more, and he digs more. And finally, Avimelech tells him, get out. My good buddy, your good friend, tells him, you got to leave. We got to separate. Right. So he goes, and he does more. In Gerar, he digs again, and he calls it Sitna. Because he said it's hatred. There's no rationale for what people are doing to us.
That's right.
And what did he do? He dug more and he dug more. And finally they said, I see we can't beat him. So and Avimelech sues him for peace, right, in the parsha. And he doesn't have a White House party. What does Yitzchak do?
Leaves.
He goes and he digs another well. But he didn't have his servants that he did it himself.
That's right.
Because the servants probably said, we've had enough, this digging and digging, they keep stopping. But Yitzchak sent a message. He said, our responsibility is to provide water for future generations. And we dig another well. That's the way you celebrate, that's the way you commemorate a victory, is not to sit there and have a White House tea party, but to go and do something for the future.
So this is a matter really of chinuch, of Jewish education.
100%.
Of schools. I hate to...
and Rabbanim, and communities, and institutions, and the messages we send out, and our media, all of them. The foundation Destiny, which helps sponsor this tonight with the Young Israel. So we've made a series of films, documentary films, on the 20th century, and on the creation of the State of Israel, and on the Shoah, et cetera, et cetera. So we've distributed these films in 400 schools across the board, not only in Orthodox schools, but in all schools. And we get feedback all the time. And the feedback basically is, we never knew this. Is this really so? Now, the advantage of a film, even though film can be fake too, but the advantage of film is that it's real. There it is in front of your eyes. But, a great hole in Orthodox education, it's changing now, but for many decades, is that the two seminal events of the 20th century in Jewish life, the Holocaust and the creation of the State of Israel, were never discussed. And there's so much misinformation. Mark Twain once said, if you don't read a newspaper, you're ill-informed. If you read one, you're misinformed.
That's especially
our media
true
is so misinformed today, but our community is misinformed. I sat with one of the Gedolim in Israel, and I went out to that mincha in the room adjacent, and he asked me to come back again because somebody was coming to visit an Israeli official, and that Haredi guy, official, and he had with him a young guy, and this guy turns to this Zaken B'Yisrael, one of the senior leaders, and he starts talking about all the guys who learned in some place in Europe. He wasn't even paying attention. I think he said in Lita. And the Rosh Yeshiva turned to him and said, how many guys do you think were learning there full time? Yeah. You think there were 5,000?
No.
He said there weren't 500. He said to him, probably not even 50. And he said, and now 150,000 people are learning full time in Israel.
Right.
And the guy looks at him and he said, is the Rosh Yeshiva saying this is a Medina Shel Chesed? And he banged on the table and he said, I just told you 150,000 guys are learning here full time. Of course it's a Medina Shel Chesed. But this guy looked astounded. Because he was involved in public life.
It's
we glorify a past that was not so glorious, and we have a present.
Well, it's a fantasy world of what Eastern Europe was.
Exactly.
It's not a realistic world.
The poverty people had, the
poverty
struggle.
and the fact that Orthodoxy was hemorrhaging. People think that a spaceship from Mars landed in Israel and deposited 1 million secular Jews.
Right.
Where did those Jews came from? They came from the Shtiebel, they came from the Rebbe, they came from the Shtetl, they came from us. And the reason they left is because the system broke down. You cannot preach poverty forever. You cannot give people persecution forever. And you cannot give people no hope forever. You can't just say, take it. And because all of that happened, so then this is the result. So the communists came and said, this is the great new world that's going to happen. The Zionists came and said, this is the great new world that happened. So now in our time, when all of the idols have broken, we are still, so to speak, fighting the battles of the 19th century, which are long over, which are not germane anymore.
Right. It is true, though, the learning was very intense, and you had great Gedolim, and you had things that I don't think, though, ever in history did we have as many people learning as we have today.
You didn't have the numbers that you have today, never.
The people learning in America, and Art Scroll deserves a lot of credit, a lot of other things deserve credit for, but especially Art Scroll, I think, for popularizing, making available to average laymen. Look how many people learned Daf Yomi. It's astonishing. You go to MetLife Stadium and you can fill it, and you see tens and tens of thousands of people.
Mayor Shapiro never dreamt filling MetLife Stadium.
He was happy to fill the thing in
Lublin, the 250 people in Lublin.
So there is so much we have to be proud that we take for granted. Look at the kosher food we have. Look at all the amenities that we have, how easy our life. My father held jobs till every Friday. That's it. And he was fired because he wouldn't work on Shabbos. Today, people take for granted all the rights and the privileges.
You can go home Friday afternoon.
And you go home early, and and then unfortunately people sometimes take too much advantage. They have to leave at 11 o'clock because, I often have businessmen who ask me, tell me, does your Shabbos really begin at noon? But that the importance to recognize how much we have achieved then can inspire us to how much more we can achieve. If we only take a defeatist attitude, we will never win. And I see it, through the eyes of the Goyim. We send non-Jews, we send to Israel. We send movie actors, we send opinion molders of every kind.
Yes.
And you see them open-eyed. They said, this is completely different than anything we anticipated. We sent Hispanic leaders. They're now organizing a national coalition to defend Israel. They said their whole lives were changed. I don't know how many Jews go there and say, my whole life has changed. Look what I saw, what I experienced. We take it for granted. We look at the Yerushalayim, we say, oh, look what we did. You didn't do it. We're the beneficiaries of it. But how many people care? How many people think about what this war on Yerushalayim is about now? Why do they attack Har HaBayis? And why do they keep saying, did they care about it for all the years? Did they do anything under the years that Jordan had it? And why do they have a meeting of Isesco and Amman where the purpose is to declare that the Kotel is really Al-Burak's wall, named for his horse, that Maras HaMachpelah is just a mosque, and Kever Rachel, known for 3,000 years as Kutab Rachel, is really a mosque named for Muhammad's driver. Muhammad never visited Israel in his lifetime. And Al-Burak supposedly followed him one end or the other to heaven after he ascended, supposedly from the Temple Mount. But why do they want to destroy our connection to it? Why does Abbas say, just last week, the Jews have no connection to this land? Why does he gain? Does it help him? Does it help the Palestinian people? Does it do anything? Because they understand better than most of us that if you take away our past, you take away our future.
That's right.
That if you cut us off from our roots, you cut us off from our connection. Why do they attack Har HaZeisim? How is it that the Jewish community in Israel, the government officials, Jewish communities around the world who have relatives buried there and for 20 years haven't visited there?
Right.
I have no relatives there. But believe me, we are fighting every day. And I went to the prime minister and I told him this is a national disgrace. And he responded. They put up cameras. Now they destroyed the cameras. They destroy Kfarim all the time. It's outrageous. Look who's buried there. Nevi'im are buried there up to Menachem Begin. We see tens and tens, hundreds of thousands of people. The oldest Jewish cemetery. And you didn't say anything. You didn't read about it. You didn't know about the constant desecration. In fact, that for decades, members of the government told me. My grandfather's there. My father, Bibi's own grandfather was buried there.
So do something.
So now we finally did something, and then they came and they destroyed it. So
now they'll do something
in the
again.
next few months, you will see a lot of steps and progress. But it was because of the committee set up here, and Lubinskis and others who took really charge of trying to change the scene. And for me, it is inexplicable that people don't get up in the morning and feel a sense of outrage. They don't care. How did you feel this after you read about the attack in the shul? to think about this was an attack on all of us. It's not an attack on them. When Khamenei and when the leaders of Hamas and Hezbollah talk, you have to read what they say. It's against the Jewish people, not just against the Jewish state. It's against America. It is against the great Satan. It's against, they call it the Crusaders. That's his first order. Israel comes further down on the line. Others reverse the order. But they understand that the goal is it's about the existence of the Jewish people. It's what we stand for that is the enemy. You know, these countries, there are 4 entities trying to establish hegemony in the region. The Wahhabis, Muslim Brotherhood, who almost succeeded, and thank God for al-Sisi, and anybody who doesn't believe that's a miracle, you are short-sighted.
Yeah, absolutely.
Having him as the
that
president.
That is only min hashamayim.
There's no, I met with him 2 weeks ago. And I'm telling you, this is one shrewd guy. This is one committed guy. Don't believe he's a Zionist. He's not. He will do what's in the interest of Egypt. But right now, and he said to me,
it's in his interest.
If I had told you 30 years ago that 1,000 tanks from Egypt would enter the Sinai and Egyptian warplanes are flying on the border of Israel and nobody has to worry about a stray bullet, would you have believed me? And then went on to explain to me some of the things that they were doing. And, he closed 1,000 tunnels. Morsi built them. Morsi poured the Islamists into it, weapons and everything. Then you have the Iran that is trying to reestablish the Ottoman Empire. And he goes through Syria into to Jordan, and in his case, Lebanon, Hamas, Gaza, to the Gulf. The Turks who want to, this crazy man Erdogan who wants to establish the Ottoman Empire. And they go through Syria, which is why the fight in Syria is so important, all the way through down to the Gulf, and et cetera. So you have 4 powers trying to establish control. What's blocking them? Look at a map. One little sliver of land in the middle there. There's one symbol of democracy and freedom. That's the enemy. That's what they have. It's not because Israel does something wrong. It's not because of the Palestinian issue. When I meet Arab leaders, they don't even raise the issue anymore. They talk to us as Israel is our only hope, they said.
That's right.
They said, we'll condemn them, but we pray for them. Meaning when they carry out the attack against the enemy. And you look at the realities on the ground today, people so distorted, they make this Arab Spring. There was never an Arab Spring. It wasn't about democracy. It was about jobs and economy and hunger. But it was about failed states. It was about the Sykes-Picot Agreement coming apart. Who knows the borders of Syria today? Who knows the borders of Iraq today? They don't exist.
All artificial countries.
And all these things from 1929, when they try to impose these divisions, Syria is not a country.
That's right.
They're
all artificial
Alawites,
countries.
Christians, Sunni, Druze, Shiites, and they're all fighting each other. There are 8 wars going on in Syria. It's not Assad versus the rebels. It's rebel versus rebel. It's Alawites, it's Kurds. They're all fighting each other. And if you don't see it, and the problem in the West is that we look at it through Western eyes, we try to impose Western
values
standards, and it doesn't apply. So we go in and we try to bribe the...
and we have Canada as a neighbor, so...
Canada and Mexico, for one. But also, when we go in and negotiate, Khamenei lies because it's one of his tools. It's something that's accepted. I said in an interview that they were Bazaris for 2,000 years. They run circles around our guys.
That's right.
And they got insulted. I said, they're not insulted being called Bazaris. They are. They're proud of it. It's their whole nature that we don't understand. And we went into Iraq. I won't say who, but a high defense official during the war in Iraq called me and he said, I want to meet you at 5:30 tomorrow morning. I said, well, who are you? And then he's one of the top leaders in Iraq during the war. The long story short, we met because he said he goes jogging in Central Park. He'll break away from his security and he wants to. And his message was, guys, wake up. You don't know how to deal with us. Pay off the local sheikhs. He said, stop pouring trillions of dollars into this Iraqi army. They won't stand for 1 second. We poured in trillions. What did they do? They took off their clothes and ran away in their underwear. Hopefully it was clean, but they ran away in their underwear. What happened to all of our investment? Now we're pouring more billions into them. People will never. Instead, what did ISIS do? They paid off the tribal chiefs.
Right.
This is exactly what this guy told me 15 years ago. And they didn't do it. And we don't understand how to fight this enemy, what it's really about. We have to understand that Iran means what they say and say what they mean. When they announced for the first time in history, the Shiites control 4 Arab capitals. They control Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen.
Right.
They call the shots. How many people here realize what has happened? This will take decades to undo. Your grandchildren's security is at stake in all of this. And then you add the possibility that in the negotiations, Iran will end up to be a nuclear power. or even a potential nuclear power, which will be enough to intimidate the others and start an arms race that will cover the region. Saudi Arabia already has theirs, packaged in Pakistan and waiting to go. The UAE, the Egyptians announced that they're going to build 14 nuclear plants. Even Jordan talks about building a nuclear plant. We understand what's at stake. These are changes that will affect us for generations to come. And vital Jewish interests, but even more vital American interests are at stake. And we see a world that's built on sheker. We are not told the truth. People don't get to see the truth until it's too late. And then we look back and say, how did this happen? The answer is all of this was visible. We knew all of this for years. We've warned about it for years. Just nobody wants to pay attention.
That's true. I just want to add, a mindset. Especially people come to Israel. My father, of blessed memory, father was a Litvish Rov, and he learned by America's Rav Kook in the first Machzor, and he was a Talmud of Reb Shimon Shkop. They had a different view of the world. So he made Aliyah, I think he was 92 years old when he made Aliyah with us. And I drove him many places, and the traffic in Jerusalem is miniature Long Island Expressway. So we came to a very long line of automobiles that was not going anywhere on King George Street. And I wanted to, come home already. I'd take him home. And my father says to me, I said, Daddy, you see the traffic, it's terrible. It's, So he said, I don't know what your problem is. He said, when I was here in 1925, he said there was one traffic light in Jerusalem on King George and Jaffa. Mm-hmm. It was the only traffic light. And he said, and our telephone number in the yeshiva was 887. And he said, Gita Cook Samachaya. And look, he said, thousands of cars and traffic and everything. Samachaya, he said, look what here. And I thought to myself, that's only a question of outlook. We are both seeing the same thing, but we're seeing it from a different perspective. I think part of the education of schools, of homes, of parents, is to give perspective and to give a background. I had a Jew in Muncie, he was in the picture frame business, but it wasn't 10-cent frames. He framed for the Shah of Iran, he framed for the Metropolitan Museum. He was, So I used to take the Bochrim from the yeshiva once a year to give him a little culture to this framing guy, and he gave us a tour, and it was a wonderful, wonderful Jew. Frum Jew, wonderful. And he explained the whole business. And one time we were there, he said, you see this canvas here? This is a Rembrandt. He said the owner paid $12 million for it. He said, I'm framing it. The frame will cost between $250,000 and $300,000. So he said, you'll say, why should anybody in their right mind pay $250,000 or $300,000 for a frame? He said, because it's a Rembrandt. And a Rembrandt cannot be framed for cheap. You have to frame it for $250,000, $300,000. So the next day in the yeshiva, I gave them a Musar Shmuas, quote unquote. And I said, the yeshiva is here to give you a $250,000, $300,000 frame for your life, which is a Rembrandt. But if you don't frame it, if you don't put it in the proper perspective, so then even the Rembrandt doesn't show up. It doesn't look like it's worth $12 million. You wasted your money. You wasted your life. I think one of the great things that you have done, and others like you, is to attempt to give us a frame, attempt to give us a perspective on things, and that we have to somehow use our canvas to fit that frame so that we'll realize the blessings that we have and the challenges that we have as well.
That's absolutely right, and I agree completely. I have the opportunity every week, another blessing, to appear with John Batchelor on a nationally syndicated show. We're on 105 stations all across the country. with millions and millions of listeners. And really, it's a bashert to how this whole thing happened, and that I get twice a week this time. And you have to see the reaction of people, because when you tell them the truth, we get from non-Jews.
It resonates.
It resonates. They say, finally, now I begin to understand. You get to see the picture. You know, the Torah gives us so many opportunities to reframe and to try, and I suggest people read Rav Soloveitchik's Machzor and Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur to get the perspective, to realize what it is, why Rosh Hashanah is such a brilliant concept in Yom Kippur, for us to reframe and create that framework for us to re-examine not only where we were.
Because again, otherwise Rosh Hashanah is,
it's another day, and you go to
another
shul,
day,
and,
right now,
you just have to sit longer in shul and listen to a longer sermon. I'm sorry, but I don't know if it's longer in Rosh Hashanah. But look, I think
all personal company except
completely. But I think it's really important, you know, that we have this information revolution. So people really assume they know. The truth is, you can't believe what you hear. You can't believe what you read. You can't even believe what you see. You can see a front page picture of the New York Times of a victim in the Gaza war, and it turns out that it's kids killed in the Syrian war.
That's right.
You can see movies and clips, but when you see the real context, you remember the picture of the Israeli soldier, and when you look behind, there are kids throwing stones right behind him and harassing him, but you don't see that in the picture. You can watch things on television that are completely distorted. I participate in things, and then you see the report and you can't believe it's the same thing. And so we have to give people the frame, the glasses through which to see through the chaos and perceive the dangers. It must be human nature. We build up defense mechanisms. Maybe it blinds us, but then future generations pay the price. B'chol dor v'dor omdim aleinu l'chalosenu. It doesn't say amdu aleihem. It doesn't say it in the past tense.
It says omdim.
The present tense. To remind us that in every generation, and only those who learn the lessons of the past are prepared to meet the challenges of the future. That only if we look realistically at where we are, and then we look at each other and reach out to each other and stop finding out what separates us, but think what unites us and how we can use the opportunities. HaKadosh Baruch Hu has blessed this generation greater than any generation in 2,000 years.
Correct.
He gave us a Jewish state. He put Yerushalayim under Jewish sovereignty. All of us claiming, all of us doing. What did we do? You know the Gemara that says, Omer Yerushalayim, lo Omar Klum.
Right.
So I always wondered, what does it mean? It means if you simply said, L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim at Ne'ilah and at the Seder, but you don't do anything the rest of the year, lo Omar Klum, you haven't said anything because you don't mean it. You have to translate it, you have to exercise, you have to do it, and each one in their own way. Not everybody can do everything, but everybody can do something.
I want to thank you, Malcolm Hoenlein, for a wonderful conversation and for the work that you're doing. And God willing, we'll try and live up to all of the challenges that you and others have placed and to the greatness of our time. And I want to thank you all for coming tonight, and that we should be zoche together to Yeshuos v'nechamos. Thank you.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to GEM, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.